There is a kind of trust you hand a bridge without ever deciding to. You come down off the interchange with the radio on, and the coffee going cold in the cup holder, and the road just keeps going where the ground falls away. Water underneath, steel overhead, a semi close enough on your left that you could reach out and put a finger in the road grime on its trailer. And you do not think not once about the thing carrying all of it. You, that truck, the 80,000 pounds of freight riding beside you, a whole second deck of traffic stacked directly over your head. You think about your exit. You think about the merge. The bridge itself is the one thing on that entire drive you have quietly decided you do not need to look at. That is not carelessness. That is the deal. The unspoken agreement that somebody at some point did the math. That the men who poured the concrete knew how many of you were coming and built for it, and that the whole thing has been holding still ever since. You trust a bridge the way you trust a floor. You put your weight on it, and you keep walking, and you never once picture what is underneath. But some bridges were never told how many of you were coming. Some were poured for one America, and then asked, without anyone really deciding it, to carry a completely different one. Twice the cars, far heavier trucks. Decades past the year, their own designers expected them to still be standing. And one of them, more than any other in the country, has become the pinched knot at the center of the whole nation's traffic. A crossing that a staggering share of America's freight has no real choice but to use. Riding a structure the federal government itself labeled obsolete before some of the drivers on it that morning were even born. Today we're talking about the Brent Spence Bridge, the double-decked steel span carrying Interstate 71 and 75 across the Ohio River between Covington, Kentucky and Cincinnati, Ohio. It is one of the busiest freight crossings in the United States. It is also, by the government's own paperwork, functionally obsolete. And the strangest part of the whole story is not that it's overloaded. It's that hundreds of thousands of people put their lives on it every single day and have trained themselves completely not to think about it. Before we get into it, if you're the kind of person who can't quite drive over a bridge the same way once you know what's holding it up, do me a favor and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel more than you'd think. And I want to know one thing while you're here. What's the bridge you cross all the time and never once think about? The one on your commute? The one over your river? Drop it in the comments. Let's get into it. The bridge built for a country that no longer exists. Go back to November 1963. That is when the Brent Spence opened, a few years after President Eisenhower signed the law that created the interstate highway system, back when the whole idea of a coast-to-coast network of freeways was so new that the engineers barely had anything to build off of. Nobody had a century of data on how Americans would drive, because Americans hadn't driven that way yet. The bridge was designed by Modjeski and Masters, a legendary firm, the same lineage of engineers behind some of the great American river crossings, and built by the American Bridge Company. And on paper, it was a clever economical piece of work. A double-decker cantilever truss, 2 roadways stacked one over the other, so a single span of steel could carry 2 full directions of interstate traffic across the Ohio without eating up half the riverbank. Southbound traffic rides the top deck toward Kentucky. Northbound traffic rides the lower deck toward Ohio, tucked underneath, with the whole upper roadway hanging over it like a low steel ceiling. They named it for Brent Spence, Kentucky's longest-serving congressman at the time, who had just retired that same year after more than 3 decades in Washington. Here is the number that matters. The bridge was built to carry somewhere around 80,000 vehicles a day, and when it opened, it did exactly that, comfortably, 3 generous lanes in each direction, with real emergency shoulders on both sides. Shoulders. That word is going to matter a lot in a minute. A place for a stalled car to limp out of traffic. A place for a state trooper to pull someone over. A margin. Breathing room. The bridge, as designed, had all of it. For about 20 years, that was fine. Then the country the bridge was built for stopped existing, and nobody rebuilt the bridge to match. The decision nobody remembers making. By the mid-1980s, there was simply more traffic than the bridge had lanes for. Cincinnati grew. Northern Kentucky grew. The interstates funneling into that single river crossing filled up. And instead of a new bridge, the answer was a paint crew. And a hard choice. In 1985, they took the shoulders away. They restriped the whole deck, erased the emergency lanes, narrowed the driving lanes down, and squeezed 4 lanes of traffic into the space originally striped for 3. It bumped the bridge's capacity up by about 1/3. It was cheap. It worked, in the narrow sense that more cars fit. And it is the exact moment the Brent Spence Bridge earned the federal designation it has carried ever since: functionally obsolete. Now, that phrase gets misunderstood constantly, so let's be precise, because the truth is stranger than the panic. Functionally obsolete does not mean the bridge is falling down. It does not mean it's structurally deficient or unsafe to cross. Engineers who've inspected it will tell you flatly that it is structurally sound, that if it weren't safe, they would close it. What functionally obsolete actually means is narrower and, in a way, more unsettling. The bridge can no longer do the job being asked of it. It was built to a standard, and the world it lives in has outgrown that standard. No shoulders, lanes tighter than modern code would ever allow, a design from an era that didn't know what was coming. We wouldn't build a bridge like this today. We know too much now, but it's already here, already load-bearing, already the thing a huge slice of the country drives across without a second thought. And the traffic never stopped climbing. What actually crosses it? Sit with the real numbers for a second, because they're the whole story. A bridge built for around 80,000 vehicles a day now routinely carries roughly 160,000. Double, not double over a holiday weekend, double as the everyday baseline. And tucked inside that figure is the part that reaches way past Cincinnati. Something like 30,000 of those daily crossings are trucks. Big freight. The Interstate 71 and Interstate 75 corridor is one of the most important trucking arteries in North America, a straight commercial spine running from the Great Lakes down toward the Gulf. And it all has to thread through this one aging span. More than $1 billion worth of goods rolls across the Brent Spence every single day. Federal officials have spent years naming it one of the worst truck bottlenecks in the entire country. So when people call this bridge critical, they don't mean sentimentally. They mean that if it stops, a measurable piece of the American economy stops with it. The stuff on the shelves, the parts in the factories, the packages on the porch. A real fraction of it spent part of its life crawling bumper to bumper across a 60-year-old double-decker with no shoulders. And here's where the danger stops being abstract. Remember those emergency lanes they erased in 1985? On a normal highway, when a car breaks down, it drifts onto the shoulder, and the world flows past. On the Brent Spence, there is no shoulder to drift onto. A single stalled car, a single fender bender, and there is nowhere for it to go. It just sits there in a live lane with a wall of trucks bearing down and a low steel ceiling overhead and no way out. The bridge's accident rate runs 3 to 5 times higher than any other stretch of interstate in either Ohio or Kentucky. 3 to 5 times. That's not bad luck. That's a design margin that was deleted to make room for cars. And the bill comes due one crash at a time. In 2014, chunks of concrete broke loose from an approach ramp and fell onto a vehicle below. Nobody was seriously hurt, but it was the kind of thing that makes a whole region look up at once and remember, for about a week, what it's driving on. Then, 6 years later, the bridge nearly took itself out entirely. The night it caught fire. If you're still with me, you already know this is the kind of story that quietly changes how you drive tomorrow. So, if you haven't yet, this is the moment to subscribe. Because what happened on this bridge in the dark is the part most people outside the region never heard. November 11th, 2020, about 2:45 in the morning. On the lower deck, the northbound side, the one with the steel roadway hanging just above it, a tractor-trailer jackknifed and stopped dead. Behind it, a second truck came in and couldn't stop in time and slammed into the wreck. And that second truck was carrying potassium hydroxide, a caustic industrial chemical. The crash sparked a fire, and the chemical fed it. It didn't just burn, it burned hot, and it burned long, the kind of fire that doesn't behave like a normal accident. Drivers caught behind it called 911 in a rising panic, describing flames roaring across the deck, a fuel tanker sitting somewhere in the jam behind them, a whole knot of people trapped on the bridge trying to back away from a wall of fire in the dark. One caller just kept repeating that it was getting bad. The heat melted the semi-trailers down into unrecognizable pieces. A veteran tow operator later said it was the worst meltdown of a tractor-trailer he had seen in 30 years on the job. The flames chewed into the steel of the upper deck's floor system, the barriers, the drainage, the electrical, and scorched the lower deck below. And here's the detail that turns the whole thing from an accident into something closer to a warning. Kentucky had, years earlier, banned hazardous material shipments on that exact stretch of Interstate 75, including the lower deck of this very bridge. A truck carrying a chemical like that arguably shouldn't have been on that deck at all. The rule existed precisely because someone had already imagined a night like this one. The night still came. When the sun came up, inspectors couldn't even get onto the bridge. It was too hot to approach. Kentucky's governor said out loud that a closure of several days was optimistic, that it could stretch into weeks, and that he would not reopen it until he'd drive his own family across it. The Ohio River underneath was closed to boat traffic. A state of emergency was declared, and for a while, one of the busiest freight crossings in America was simply gone, a black, blistered gap in the supply chain. Then, something almost redemptive happened. Crews tore out and rebuilt a whole section of the deck, ripped up around 160 feet of roadway, swapped in new steel stringers, re-poured the pavement, redid the barriers, and they reopened the bridge on December 22nd, 41 days after the fire, a day ahead of schedule and under budget. But listen to the quiet line the engineers dropped afterward, because it's the whole story in a single sentence. They said the location of the crash had been, of all things, fortuitous. Lucky, because if that fire had burned a little to the left or a little to the right, a few feet either way, it would have hit the wrong member of the truss, and it would have compromised the structural integrity of the bridge itself. A few feet, that's the margin the most important freight crossing in the region was running on, not the margin they designed in. That got painted over in 1985. The margin that was left, luck, and a fire that happened to land in the one spot that could take it. Fix that damn bridge. For decades, everybody with a map and a calculator knew the real answer was not paint. It was a second bridge. And for decades, it did not happen. Plan after plan, study after study, administration after administration. All of it stalling on the same rock every big American infrastructure project stalls on. Who pays? And whether to charge tolls to do it. The Brent Spence became almost a national punchline for the way the country can know exactly what it needs and still not build it. In 2021, a president stood nearby and vowed in plain language to fix that damn bridge. This time, the money actually showed up. The 2021 federal infrastructure law put real dollars on the table, and in late 2022, the crossing was awarded a grant of roughly $1.5 billion federal dollars. The plan that emerged is elegant, and it is finally moving. They are building a brand new companion bridge right alongside the old one, a modern cable-stayed span, the kind held up by fans of cable instead of a heavy steel truss. When it is done, that new bridge takes all the through traffic, all the Interstate 71 and Interstate 75 freight roaring between the Great Lakes and the South. And the old Brent Spence? It does not get torn down. It gets to retire into an easier life. Reconfigured for local traffic only, restriped back down to 3 lanes in each direction, and given back, at long last, the emergency shoulders that were taken from it in 1985. After nearly 40 years of carrying double its intended load with no margin at all, the plan is to let the old bridge finally do the gentler job it was actually built to do. Ground broke on the new crossing in May of 2026. The whole thing runs somewhere north of $4 billion, and notably, they have committed to building it without tolls. If everything holds, the new bridge opens around 2032. Read that year again, 2032. What this is really about, which means here is where the story actually leaves you, not in the past, right now, because the new bridge is not built yet. The fix everyone fought over for a generation is real, it's funded, it's under construction, and it is still years away. Between now and the day that new span opens, every single thing still has to cross the old one. All 160,000 vehicles a day, all 30,000 trucks, all that freight, over the 60-plus-year-old double-decker with the narrow lanes and the missing shoulders and the truss that a fire once missed by a few feet. The bridge that was labeled obsolete before most of us learned to drive is not a relic yet. It's tomorrow morning's commute. So here's what this is really about. Not fear. Fear is easy, and it burns off by the next green light. It's about the gap, the enormous invisible gap between how ordinary a bridge looks and how much it is actually holding up. We don't stop seeing our infrastructure because it hides. A bridge can't hide. It's 800 feet of steel over a river in broad daylight. We stop seeing it because it works, because it held yesterday and the day before and every day of our lives. And that unbroken streak of holding is exactly the thing that lets us stop looking. Familiarity does what camouflage never could. It makes the biggest object on the whole drive disappear. The Brent Spence was never built to carry this America. It was built for a smaller, slower, lighter one by men who never imagined the load we'd hang on it or the years we'd ask it to stand. And it has held anyway. Overloaded, obsolete, stripped of its own safety margin, carrying a piece of the national economy across the water twice a day, every day, without complaint and mostly without notice. It's still out there right now, still stacked 2 decks high over the Ohio, still full of trucks in the dark, still holding the way it has held since long before anyone driving across it tonight was born, quietly, patiently, a few feet of luck at a time, waiting for the newer, stronger thing being built right beside it to finally come and take the weight. And almost nobody crossing it will look up, which, if you think about it, is the highest compliment we ever pay a bridge. We only ever notice the ones that fail us. This one never has. So we drive across it with the radio on and the coffee going cold, and we trust it the way we trust the floor. Right up until the morning we can't.